detail about each maqam or each basically tune pattern, and explain to you kind of how to develop it yourself, inshallah. So tell me when I should start, Abdullah.
You good.
Okay. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Inshallah, today we're going to just cover, this is going to be our first lesson in what we call maqamat, Quranic maqamat. So I just want to introduce this concept a little bit, and then we're going to go into it in some detail, inshallah. So what do we mean by Quranic maqamat, right? It's basically melody patterns, right? Patterns of melody that you guys have probably all heard popular reciters of Quran like Abdul Basit, Minshawi, right? Mishari, Rashid, for instance, like all these guys. You probably, if you've listened to Quran at any point, you've heard these names, and you hear how they recite the Quran, the tune patterns that they use, almost like the melodies that they use, right? So there's a whole science that goes into that. Like how do you specifically recite the Quran, right? What specific patterns and tunes should you use, right? What are the patterns and tunes that are traditionally used to recite the Quran? So I think first off, I think it's really important to introduce why this is important, right? So there's a hadith that's from Sunni and Shia sources, accepted from both sides, comes from the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "Laysa minna man lam yataghanna bil Quran," right? That those who don't sing the Quran, those who don't hymn the Quran, they're not from amongst us, right? So reciting the Quran with a beautiful melodious tone is something that we learn from our Holy Prophet, right? And you guys have heard like certain prophets, right? Like Prophet Dawood, for instance, right? The Quran even mentions how Allah gave him a beautiful voice, and he used to recite the Zabur, right? The Psalms. He used to recite the Psalms in a way that even the birds and the mountains would join him, right? So that's how beautiful his voice was. Even Imam Sajjad, alayhi salam, our fourth Imam, right? He had such a powerful voice when he would recite Quran that if people heard his voice while he was reciting, his voice was so captivating that they would literally stop. Like they would stop in their tracks and just listen to him, because like that's how powerful and strong his voice was, right? So that tells you, like, how was the Imam reciting? Was he reciting flat? No, he must have been reciting with the tune, right? He must have been having a certain melody that was attracting those around him to listen to him, right? So that kind of gives you a little bit of background and context about why this is important. Learning the tune patterns and basically the melodies that we use for the Quran is super important, and it can easily be transferred over to other basically disciplines too. For instance, poetry. For instance, reciting basically eulogies for the Ahlul Bayt, right? If you're reading like a matam or a latmiya, you can use those same patterns, right? It also helps you connect a little bit more emotionally with what you're reading and what you're sort of, even when you hear other people reciting something, you can connect with it a little bit more because you understand what they're doing with their voice, how they modulate it, right? So that's kind of a little bit of background. So we did the hadith introduction. So Quranic prereqs. So I think this is really important. When it comes to Quran in particular, one of the things with a lot of, like, when it comes to, so we'll take the concept of, we'll use this term music, right? People think of music in a bad way, right? They say, well, music, absolutely haram. There's nothing it has to do with Islam, right? But the proper way to think about it is that when you think about music, right, you think about it in the sense of basically organized sound, right? That's what music is. It's organized sound that basically is organized in a way that sounds pleasant to the ear, right? And so inherently, there's nothing wrong with that, right? The problem is when it's misappropriated or misused for things that that lead to sin or lead to vice, right? So for instance, like even when you look at Sistani is a very popular Shia marja, right? That many of us might follow. But he actually has this, that music becomes haram, it becomes prohibited when it resembles the types of gatherings where people kind of gather together to commit sins. You know, if they're the types of tunes and patterns and melodies that you're using are popular in gatherings of sin, then you can't listen to those sounds, right? You can't listen to that type of music. So that's what we call prohibited music. But there are certain, I mean, tunes and melodies, if they're appropriated correctly, they're used in the right way, there's nothing wrong with that, right? And like I said, some examples, Prophet Dawood, Imam Sajjad, right? The Holy Prophet with this hadith, all of that shows us that there is some positive aspect to using organized sound, and us Muslims, we should have really hegemony in this field. We should be using this more. I think a lot of people, they're so afraid of music and so afraid of sound that they just say, "Oh, take all that out, just be monotone, just forget all of the tunes and all of this." But that's completely wrong, right? Think about it like grapes, right? So some people, they take grapes, they ferment it, it becomes wine, right? But you can eat those grapes in a halal way. There's nothing wrong with it, right? So it's like you can take the same thing, but if you use it in the incorrect way, it becomes haram, right? That same thing, if you use it the right way, it's completely halal, right? So same thing, it's sort of a good analogy to music, right? If you use it in the correct way, if you use it with the correct intention and the correct purpose, it can be actually a type of ibadah. It can be a type of worship of Allah, right? So, but if you use it in the wrong way, then of course it takes you towards sin, right? Do you guys have questions about that? Does that make sense? Any comments? Yeah.
So in our culture, music isn't looked bad upon, but there's this way that people view a certain way you sing, or like a certain way you bring out a melody. So they believe that if you put like a lot of, I guess like a lot of effort into it, it sounds like I don't know, it sounds like a song almost, and then people consider it like bad. People consider it bad that like, oh, he's reciting, let's say a Latmiya, and he's putting so much like harshness in his not harshness, but like he's singing the note with like a lot of melody, which is like making it sound like a song. Then they consider it like, oh, this is bad, this is haram, or whatnot. What
Yeah.
is like? I mean,
So I
they're
think
still like saying the message out,
Yeah.
but they're just doing it like a.
So. Anybody have any comments about what Brother Muhammad said? Anybody?
Like kind
Yeah.
of like
Yeah.
feedback might not be the right term, but
Yeah.
like feedback off that.
Yeah.
I feel like the kind of, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that, and again, this is like, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of bridging culture and religion together, but an Arabic kind of influence, and a lot of influence, there's what is called melisma, which is kind of this wavering pitch that kind of occurs as synonymous with like Arabic recitation of the Quran. So I think, from my humble perspective and like understanding what I do know, I think it's the effort is more like a kind of like embracing of what is brought upon. But there is something to be argued about, too much of an effort to say like, okay, maybe it's too much. Maybe like too much intention is not good. So maybe more of a vesseling that can occur in that way.
Yeah. Very good.
I think maybe it gets into a great territory when people start acting or
Yeah.
like orchestrating the emotions versus actually having the emotion and presenting it in the melodic form, which each maqam sometimes represents.
Yeah.
Like a sad verse or a happy verse or a verse of relief or a verse of advice or a verse of admonishment or a verse of like Jannah versus Nar. I think if someone has that feeling and then presents it in the melodic form versus just like acting out, I guess the melody. I think that may be the gray area where if you act out too much, it becomes almost like a performance.
Yeah.
Versus the reality of the reading or the reality of your feeling.
So I think you guys are hitting on an important thing, which is that I think some people, they almost try too hard. It's like almost contrived, It's like it has to be natural and organic. Like it shouldn't be something that sounds artificial or fake, or even sometimes some people, they try so hard that they end up being almost cacophonous of the way that they recite, It's like they're really high pitch and then they go really low pitch and then they're all over the place, Like that's what we call cacophony, where there's no real rhythm, there's no real synchrony between the sounds, right? And that sounds very distasteful to the ear, right? But then there's some people who will take it to the extreme where it's almost like the sound. This is kind of where it gets into, you know, Sistani's fatwa, right? That if you're the sound that you're producing, the rhythm, the melody that you're using represents the types of gatherings, or represents the type of sounds that are popular amongst people who are drinking, gambling, you know, in bars and casinos. Like if you're using music that sound, or using basically melodies that have that similarity, then that's haram, right? So of course there's a little bit of subjectivity that naturally comes into that though, because you have to know, okay, what types of sounds are popular in those places, right? So there's a certain element of subjectivity, but I think it's about your intention, right? It's about how you're triggering your emotions and how genuinely and organically you're actually sort of channeling your energy. And I think that's super important. Um, I think to an extent, you know, innamal a'malu bin niyat, your actions are determined by your intentions. So if you have a good intention, there'll always be critics, there'll always be haters, there'll always be people who complain, but just do your best, you know, and just try to do ihsan in whatever you do. I think that's the most important thing, right? Um, but I think one thing when it comes to Quran that's super important, so this is not so much with like latmiyas and poetry, right? But with Quran, you can't make up your own rhythm for the Quran, right? You can't say, for instance, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You can't do that, right? You have to recite it fluidly. You can't like stop and go whenever you want, right? It has a very certain flow that you have to follow, right? So like that's a small example, right? The other thing is your tajweed has to be right. You cannot sacrifice your tajweed for the sake of melody, right? That's wrong. Like it has to follow the right tajweed. Tajweed is something that, and tajweed is kind of, anybody can give us like basically what's the meaning of tajweed, and what is that kind of, how does that apply to Quran?
Someone please correct me if I'm wrong. Somewhere.
Yeah.
But I'm not mistaken. I think it's like pronunciation, kind of vowel sounds, and kind of correct, you know, correct pronunciation.
Yes. So correct pronunciation is a huge part. But there's some other rules too, like that are very unique. So, you know, an Arabic speaker, for instance, who reads the Quran, they can read the Quran just like a straight text, and it would still be incorrect, right? Because they're not following the actual rules of Quranic. Quran has very specific rules of like intonation, specific rules of like basically how you pull certain sounds, right? What they call mud. Mud is like how you elongate certain basically hollow sounds. Like for instance, the letter alif or the letter ya, like how you're supposed to pull that, how many counts you're supposed to pull that. So it has very specific rules, right? Yes, idgham, idhar, for instance, there's certain rules like that. Like for instance, there's also certain rules, like there's a rule called qalqala, right? Qalqala is when you have a letter that's one of these letters, qaf, ta, ba, jim, or dal, right? If they have a sukun on them, or like basically you're stopping on that sound, you have to put a little echo into it, right? So you have to say, for instance, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, right? You can't say ahad and just stop it. You have to do a little bounce, ahad, right? So that's called qalqala, right? So there's certain rules that when it comes to Quran, and we can even do a whole course in tajweed if you guys want. I think that's another really good topic that we could sort of build on. But I sort of wanted to introduce this because I think this has a little bit more appeal. Especially, I think that one thing that's really good about this is eventually if you learn these tunes, you can also do things like adhan, you can do things like latmiyas, and you'll have like the skills to be able to use different tunes and be able to modulate them, you know? So what do we mean by maqamat? So maqamat comes from the Arabic word maqam, right? Maqam, what does maqam mean? Yeah, like a place, right? A place of standing, literally, right? A place of standing is what maqam is, right? Comes from the Arabic root qama, right? Qama means to stand, right? Qama yaqumu, right? Maqam is the place that you stand, right? So they have what they call maqamat sawtiyya, right? Maqamat sawtiyya. Sawt, what does that word mean? Have you guys heard the word sawt? Voice, yeah. So basically, standing positions of your voice, right? Or basically, you can think of it like melodies, right? It's literally what it means in Arabic, but it means in English you would translate it as melody patterns, right? So in Arabic, it's kind of Arabic, but I would say also in general, Um, in the Quranic, I guess, traditional Quranic way of reciting Quran, right? There's certain patterns that we use, certain melody patterns that are classic when you're reciting Quran. And even when you go to like traditional latmiyas, even if be it in the Urdu tradition, be it in the Persian tradition, the Arabic tradition, a lot of the Eastern traditions, obviously in general, but you'll often find that these same patterns are used in their eulogy recitations, right? So I just want to explain these tune patterns very brief, and I'll just demonstrate them for you, right? So there's a little Arabic acronym that's used. Okay. Sihrik, like that. Okay. So it's Suni'a bi sihrik, right? So this is the little acronym for the tune patterns, right? So each one, so I'll give you the first one, it's called Saba, right? Saba, and then you have Nahawand, right? And by the way, you guys can find examples of this online. If you just were to look up Nahawand, right, or Saba, you'd find like examples, right, of these patterns, right? Ajam. Have any of you guys heard of this before, by the way?
Some of them, not all of them, but some of them.
Okay, Bayat.
So this is an acronym?
Yep. Sika. And then Rust, or sorry, Hijaz rather. Hijaz. And then Rust. And then Kurd, right? So there's basically, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 patterns, right? So basically 8 maqamat, or 8 tune patterns that are used when you're reciting Quran. These are like the 8 tune patterns you'll see. And the thing is, each tune has its own, what we call ihsas, or its own feeling behind it, its own sort of emotion that it gives you, right? So when you read it, it's sort of like you'll notice the emotions sort of come out, right? So I'll just go down the list, and I'm just going to say the Bismillah, right? Bismillah in each one of these tune patterns, so you guys can see how it sounds like, right? So Saba, it goes like this. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. It's kind of like sad a little bit, right? It's almost like you're crying when you recite it, right? So, or I'll say salawat, right? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, right? It's kind of a little bit sad. Like the sound of it is very sad. And then Nahawand is a little bit more happy, right? It goes like this. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, right? It has a little bit of a, Nahawand is a place in Iran, right? And this area of Iran, it was very popular to recite the Quran like this. Or if I did salawat, right? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, right? This is this pattern of Nahawand. It goes up and down kind of in a little bit more of a happy tune. So when you're reciting Quran, if you're reading like verses of Jannah, you'll use this tune, right? Yeah?
I've also heard from like Ali brothers, specifically Brother Yadullah, when he gives the adhan, he starts high too.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, exactly. You know, and the thing is, so as you get, so that's the type of maqam he uses. It's a very specific Iranian maqam. It's kind of like a sub-branch of these. These are the 8 big maqams, but the maqam he uses is called maqam dashti. It's like a very, very, it's kind of like a mix a little bit of Kurd and Rust. It's like a combination of 2 maqams. So hopefully, inshallah, as we learn more about this, I'll teach you guys those things too. You know, there's like a whole bunch of like maqams that are combinations of these, but these are like the 8. You know, it's all based on what they call like literally all of this. It's actually tied very deeply into music theory and things like that. I think it's better from an Islamic perspective to focus more on how you actually make the sounds, right? And a lot of it is based on taqlid, or imitation, right? So you hear like reciters and you learn the patterns, but all of this is actually like, you know, connected very much to do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, like that. There's like a rhythm, you know, for basically, or I guess like scales of sounds that you can go up all the way, and you can sort of find exactly how each one of these maqams has basically a representation on that musical sort of trajectory, that almost like a piano, there's different, each sound has a different intonation, right? So Saba, Nahawand, okay, so Ajam, it goes like this. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, right? So it's like very, very high. This one's also very happy, right? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. It's a very happy sounding maqam, right? Bayat is the one that's used more traditionally for Quran, right? So when someone starts a Quran recitation, they'll usually use maqam bayat in a low register. They'll recite like Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, right? You've heard a lot of people recite Quran like that, right? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, right? That's bayat.
Does Sheikh Abdul Basit use this?
Oh, yes.
Because I've heard of it. Like
Yes.
sometimes when he says Bismillah.
Yes. Yeah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And every reciter, no matter what their tune is, no matter how their voice is, they'll all use these maqamat, right? So Minshawi, for instance, you can play any recitation of Minshawi, I'll be able to tell you instantly what maqam he's using, right? Because like you train your ear to be able to pick these up instantly. So that's bayat, right? Sika is kind of like, it's a little bit also happy. So طلع البدر, that very famous طلع البدر علينا, or what is it? طلع البدر علينا من ثنيات الوداع. Right? That's Sika. That maqam is Sika, right? So like for instance, Basmala, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's called Sika, that specific tune pattern. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, right? That specific pattern is called Sika, right? And this is also a Persian maqam, right? A Persian, basically, it has its roots in Persia. Hijaz is one that's very popular in, you'll often find like in Makkah, they'll recite adhan like this, like Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. That's basically Hijaz, right? That maqam. So, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That specific tune pattern, that's called Hijaz, right? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. It's also supposed to be like it's almost supposed to have a little bit of anger in it, It's a little bit of an angry maqam. So when you're reciting verses about hell, for instance, people will often employ this maqam, right? So Rust, I know I'm taking a lot of time. I hope it's not too bad, but so Rust is kind of like they call it maqam al-istiqama, or it's a maqam of it has, first off, it's very, very powerful, very flexible maqam. You can use it for almost anything, but it has a lot of rigor in it. It's a very rigorous maqam. It's like if you're doing something with a lot of, like I often recite adhan in maqam Rust, right? Like when I recite adhan here, that's what you. So I'll give you an example in maqam Rust, right? So for instance, if you're doing adhan, right, you would recite like this: Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Right? That's Rust, right? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's Rust, right? So that specific tune, right? Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So that's Rust, right? And then Kurd is kind of like again, it comes from the Kurdish, that they used to recite this specific tune pattern a lot, right? So it's also used a lot in du'as, right? When you're reciting a certain du'a, especially like du'a kumail, people will often use this tune pattern, right? But it has a sense of almost like sadness in it too, right? It goes like, sort of like this. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. It has almost like a sadness about it, right? And it's also a very popular maqam for like certain people. Like there's a guy named Ra'ad al-Kurdi. I think you'll find him on YouTube. He recites Quran a lot. He'll use this specific maqam, you know. So Kurd is actually kind of linked to Nahawand. They're kind of similar, but there's just a slight difference in sort of the intonation, and it makes it a completely different sounding maqam in totality. So this is just kind of a brief introduction. I think what we should really do is focus on learning each one of these one by one. So I think it'll probably take about 2 weeks, but inshallah, maybe each one of these we focus our time in like learning one pattern at a time. I think maybe, is there any one out of these that stands out to you guys the most that you'd like to start with?
Isn't Hijaz like a really common one for people?
Hijaz is a very good one, especially if you want to do adhan in that, right? So if you like to do adhan in that tune, you know, that Hijazi tune, brother Naeem, who does adhan, he likes to use this Hijaz a lot when he does adhan. So, you know, it's a popular one, right? And it kind of has like, if you're reciting, a lot of people use it in ziyarat too, you know, especially ziyarat of Imam al-Hussein, for instance, will use this maqam because it has that sense of like sort of anger, but also like sadness at the same time, right? So, I mean, if you guys want to start with Hijaz, we certainly can. Yeah.
Hijaz will be the first one.
Okay. Yeah. Hijaz would be a good one, inshallah. So we'll focus on that next week. So the thing I want you guys to work on, sort of as homework, is basically strengthening your voice, right, and your vocal patterns, right. So usually, so they have these things called octaves. I don't know if you guys heard of octaves? So octaves are basically you start low and you should be able to work your voice up, right? And you should at least be able to go basically eight intonations, right? So you want to work on building that. In order to actually do these maqamat, you want to train your voice to be able to do that, right? So you should be able to start low and go up, right? You should be able to do that. Right? You should be able to do that full. So if you can do that at least 8 levels, then you can do, but you should train your voice. So try to train your voice, even like when you're in the shower or whatever. I used to train my voice like all the time until like I built the capacity to kind of go up and down with my voice. I did not grow up with a good voice. I mean, I learned a lot of this when I was like 20, like 23, 24, you know? So, I mean, you guys can do it. You guys are still actually, probably many of you are still younger than I was, you know, when I first started learning this. So you guys can definitely, you know, and I'm not claiming I'm an expert, inshallah. Maybe I can learn many things from you guys too, inshallah. But I think it's good to practice this because we need more talent. And especially in the mosque here, we need more talent, more people who can recite, you know, and show us their beautiful voices, inshallah. So
The intention behind it too, to really reflect the meanings of the Quran. I think this is like a wonderful way to do it.
yeah.
Find the corporeal of your voice into the spiritual of the Quran and present it. I think
And eventually what happens is like you start, when you get really connected with these tunes, it's like you can find almost that your emotion naturally just gets channeled through these tunes. And it's like when I read Quran, almost I find myself just naturally flowing from one tune to the next. It's almost like a natural progression. And even when you listen to reciters, like you listen to Abdul Basit or you listen to Minshawi reading the Quran, it just connects you even more because you see what they're doing with their voice. You see how they're changing the pattern, and you recognize like, okay, well now the verse is talking about Jahannam, so they changed their pattern. Now they're going back to Jannah. Oh, they changed their pattern again. Like, and you start to see what they're doing, you know, and it just connects you so much more to the recitation. So inshallah, may Allah give us the tawfiq, inshallah, to continue these. Are you guys interested in this? Do you think it's a good thing to focus on?
Yeah.
Inshallah. All right.
Just to kind of like connect off of the bullet point. So I'm coming from like a, you know, secular point of view just because that's kind of what I place myself in. But to kind of say like the corporeal connection, mind, to, from musicality to the soul to like flow, there's this producer named Rick Rubin, and he tells an artist named Neil Young, okay, when you are performing, he tells him play the guitar while you're singing, so that way the focus isn't placed on, as Bilal was saying, so much effort into like a premeditative cognitive action. It's more so a flow that is channeled as a vessel. So the guitar kind of distracts the mind from thinking too much. And so that way there's a natural flow that can occur in that sense. And then another point, not to challenge anybody, but
Yeah.
in the sense of like, melodies or modes or scales kind of that are, I'll say, stolen from popular artists like, like a Beyonce or a Weeknd. I say stolen because just as like, maybe a certain word to put down people of African diaspora, that has an original meaning when you go to the etymological roots of it. However, it's been flipped on its side in the same way maybe the word dope could be, it has been reclaimed. So in the sense that there's an original kind of intention behind that kind of sinful, melody. And that's kind of like what I hear in these different accounts.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you're saying that the origin has been manipulated,
Exactly,
and bastardized, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's where a little of this comes down to, you as the person to be able to make that it's a little bit of a subjective judgment. Like, if this is a tune that you heard from Taylor Swift and now you're all of a sudden using it, for Quran, like that's sort of not really, I mean, that's not very genuine. That's not very, I mean, of course you want to try to avoid those tunes that sort of create a lot of like ecstasy in you almost. It's not like actually connecting you in a organic way to Allah's book. It's sort of like taking you to a high plane, right? Sort of how these people, they listen to songs to such an extent. I remember when I was in, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'll just say it. When I was in high school, maybe like my early undergrad years, right? I actually got into a phase where I sort of started getting away from religion, and I became really into music, right? I started listening to a lot of music. What I found was actually I became extremely depressed, I could actually like feel it because it's like this music just keeps playing in your head, and the messages of these songs are vile. They're very disgusting actually, but it's very very catchy tunes, catchy sounds that kind of draw you towards it. But then the lyrics are completely, garbage. And when you listen, when you actually like, you're like, I'm just interested to know what exactly is the origin of the song. And it's like, oh, this guy was just, he was, you know, uh, basically shot up with all these drugs, and all of a sudden was sitting with his friends and came up with this epiphany that, oh, let's just, make this song, right? And so like a lot of this, it's like you look at it shaitani roots, right? And then you look at the message of what it's saying, and it's completely like terrible. But it's not even it's not only the message, but it's actually the song itself has a very like it creates. It's almost supposed to be like a way to create ecstasy in you, create a state where you're kind of lost, and so that's what I found myself getting drawn into. And then I slowly like that's when I switched to Quran, like, and I completely switched 180, and I got into these maqamat and learning kind of like these are very pure tunes, right? And you're using them for a good purpose, and you're not allowing yourself to get influenced by kind of these evil inclinations, right? So that's personally what happened to me, and then it really just switched my whole trajectory as a person. So, but I think a lot of us, I mean, I personally, I've been where a lot of you guys have in terms of all the terrible influences that are out there in our society, and it's really hard sometimes to control yourself. And initially, when I was like away from home, I was like, oh, this is my chance. But then when I saw how dark it was, I like basically completely switched, and I was like, connecting yourself to the Quran is like the best thing you can do. And this is nur, right? This is light from Allah. This is what like really grounds you as a person.
Isn't it fair to say though, like if one is imbued with a great enough light, then they can enter, not maybe enter, but face darkness as a chance to kind of learn, to reclaim those melodies. As in, like, I will, like me personally, I'll always hear like a homeless person on the street because there is a story to be told. There's something that I can't understand from anyone else other than that person. So I think there's something to be learned in everything, and I think it's up to the individual at whatever point in their life to kind of view their own strength or their own perception through their own lens and say, can I take this on? If not, okay. If I can, excuse my language, but walk through the flames untethered.
Yeah, I mean, I think every person, that's somewhat, it's a subjective journey. Everybody has their own path, right? I think that when it comes down to it, though, you have to really do some soul searching to really see where where do you think this is going to take you? Like, where is this path going to take you? Is it going to take you closer to Allah or further away from Him? And you need to really dig deep to be able to make that assessment and that judgment. And yes, I mean, to many extent, I mean, I would say many of these tunes, you will often find them, appropriated or used in.
I would argue everything is actually based on these tunes.
Yeah.
These are very archaic tunes.
Yeah, I mean, these tunes are very ancient. They go back like even before Islamic, even like before the Holy Prophet, these tunes existed. So basically, I mean, to an extent, you could appropriate these tunes for all sorts of things, right? You can use them for good, you can use them for bad. Like we said, music can be used for good, can be used for bad, right? But when you focus, especially these tunes, they've reached a status where it's completely orthodox and mainstream to use them when it comes to reciting Quran. So it's a way almost to channel that musical talent or interest that you have into something that builds your spirituality and builds your connection with the religion, builds your proximity to Allah, right? And that's what I found in these maqamat.
It also forces you to know the meanings of the Quran too.
Yeah.
Which maqam are you going to use for which ayah?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, that's another huge thing. And they actually have in a lot of places in the Islamic world, they actually have competitions where they have people like sit and recite the Quran, and it's like they judge them based on these too. Like they judge them on tajweed and like everything else too, right? They're where they start and where they stop, like the stopping and starting rules of Quran as well. There's certain rules when it comes to that. Their pronunciation, but they actually judge them based on these tunes too. It's like, oh, well, why did you use that tune? That's a sad tune. Why did you use that talking about a verse that's happy? Even like, for instance, like when the intonation goes with like certain words in the Quran. Like for instance, when you say the word sama, right? You should go up. Was sama, like if you read sama like this, was sama, right? It's like, why are you using a low voice? Like, why are you using a low pitch? You should be going up because sama means heaven. Like, why are you going low? So like they even judge them based on these types of things. Or when you say the word ard, say ard with like a low pitch because ard is like the earth, right? So like even down to this level, they get very granular with the way they grade people who recite Quran, right? And there's like criteria that they use to figure out who's more like connected with the recitation, who's actually channeling the meaning better with the way that they're reciting. So that's really powerful, and that shows you like how connected Muslims are to the Quran, right? Because like which other book is there's that level of detail when it comes to like how you recite it, how you even like what tunes you use, what melodies you use, how you fuse those melodies, how much attention are you paying to the meaning, like while you're reciting. All those things actually play a huge role in the way the Quran is judged, and when it's being recited, right? So hopefully this was useful, inshallah, and I think we should hopefully continue it. What do you guys think? Yeah? Inshallah. All right. Yeah.
But is it fair to say that there's like a judgment subversion of techniques for the purpose of expanding onto this canon? Like, for example, I saw somebody who wore pink to a funeral once. They had a certain form. It's not something to be sad about in the moment, but then everything is a return form at the end of the day. So, and not specifically with those examples, like one wouldn't go low with the earth, or go low with, Jonathan, or go high with,
Right.
John, but, to kind of subvert certain things where not in a premeditated way, but as counts.
Yeah. So they sometimes have like there's room to accommodate that. You know, some people they'll go up for a very specific purpose. Like they'll go up with a word that should have been down for a purpose to kind of convey a certain message, right? But it's like that should be immediately apparent to the audience. Like when they're hearing it and they're hearing the way that you recite, they should be able to immediately pick that up. It should be organic, right? Almost that connection with your recitation is almost organic for the audience. But if it's very contrived and artificial, and it's like, well, you didn't really put enough thought into how you're actually conducting your voice, then that results in negative points for them, right? So it's a very delicate sort of art, you know, in terms of grading the way that the Quran is recited. But even, I mean, this is just a brief introduction. There's many different branches, like within Quranic sciences. Like you can talk about tajweed, you can talk about like the pronunciation of makhraj, like you were saying. You know, you could talk about qira'at. You know, there are different ways or different modes of recitation. There's all these different things that you know we could definitely expand upon and learn more on. I figured this is a good topic because it draws interest because it's really focusing on building your voice. You know. But I think we can expand into those other things as well, inshallah.
أحسنت. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Thank you so much, Dr. Jafar, inshallah. So we're going to continue our series from 2 weeks ago, before the morning of Hussein alayhi salam. We had a break, and before we talked about this, where we're going to talk about some of the lesser-known Sahaba or companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the reason behind this is, number one, because we as a school of thought tend to focus a lot more on the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and the Imams alayhi salam, and we don't really kind of look at what's going on around them in terms of the interactions with other companions, with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as well as with the Imams alayhi salam. And the second reason why we do this is because the Sahaba show us the nuances of what we would look like, right? As people that are not like infallible, as normal people. You know, the normal people back then, what was their interaction with you know the message or the truth, and what are we going to reflect in our own reality? You know, what kind of companion are you, you know, to the Imam Sahaba Zaman or to the truth, inshallah. So that is the reason why we're doing this, inshallah. Last week we talked about Uthman bin Hanif radiallahu anhu. This week we'll talk about Anas ibn Harith or Ibn al-Harith al-Kahili. Anyone familiar with this guy? Radiallahu anhu. Anyone familiar with this guy? You know, he was actually spoken about, I think, sometime in one of the maqatil. But you know, we'll get into him, inshallah. So he is he's the son of Al-Harith ibn Nabih, who was also a companion of the Prophet. They were both companions. He was a young person, both from Mecca, and they were both Meccans. There wasn't really much history in terms of when he was born, or you know what was going on in the early years. But what we know about him is he and his dad basically believed in the revelation in Mecca sometime, you know, 13 before Hijrah, and they were with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they eventually did the Hijrah to Medina. And then here's our map again. Here's Mecca. Here's Medina, north. So they eventually made their hijrah over there. And he's known as Al-Kahili, but he also, his family actually goes to Asad ibn Khuzaymah, or Al-Asadi. So he's actually also Asadi. If you guys heard that big family, he's also, you know, Al-Kahili Al-Asadi. So things about him and his dad: when he was in Medina, he was part of the migrants that unfortunately were homeless or unmarried or did not have any caretakers. So do you guys know where he ended up? There's a famous group of people. They used to kind of be at the back of the Prophet's mosque, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's about 100 to 300 people that used to kind of be there. He used to kind of invite them to eat with him. He sometimes would sit with them and talk to them. You know, they were poor people. The common ones that people talk about is Abu Huraira was, you know, there, but he was actually part of this. You guys know it's a common Ashab al-Suffa or Ashab al-Dhulla is what they call them. Ashab al-Suffa. So the people that used to sit under the shade. So what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did for those people. Some of the migrants actually didn't have any family in Medina when they came over there. and they didn't have any sponsors, and they were pretty poor and homeless. So he actually brought them to the back of the Prophet's mosque ﷺ to actually live there, and he put a shade on top of them, palm frond shade on top of them, so that they can kind of live back there. And he would hang out with them, and he would invite sometimes 1 or 3 of them to his house to eat with him every night. So him and his dad were part of that group. So other things with him, he himself fought in Badr. This was documented that he actually fought with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Badr, and he also fought in the Battle of Hunain, which is actually sometime in between I would say sometime here, which is one of the bigger battles. So he was in both of those, and he also was a famous narrator of hadith. Some of the hadiths that he did narrate was actually a pretty famous one. He may have heard of it in Arabic. He says, عن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إني ابني هذا this my son. So he's Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم pointing to Imam Hussein عليه السلام. إني ابني هذا يقتل بأرض يقال لها كربلاء فمن شهد ذلك منكم فلينصره. So my son, so this Sahabi is narrating from Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم. He says that Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم pointed to Imam Hussein عليه السلام. This my son will die in a land called Karbala. Whoever witnesses this, or witnesses him there, so go and help him. And then another one, which they say is actually, and he narrates from his father. So Anas is narrating from Al-Harith, where Al-Harith says, سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, and Hussein عليه السلام was في حجره, Hussein عليه السلام was on his lap, and يقول إن ابني هذا يقتل في أرض يقال لها العراق فمن أدركه فلينصره. So instead of the first hadith that we talked about, the one that he heard from his dad, which he narrates from his dad, is that while Imam Hussein was in the lap of the Prophet ﷺ, he says that this son of mine will die in a land called Iraq. Whoever is near him, please help him. Or whoever sees him, help him or support him, inshallah. So these are actually in both schools of thoughts, sources, Bukhari and Ibn Hajar and Ibn Shahr al-Shub. And I think when I was reading, only Dhahabi has an issue with the hadith itself, but other scholars rejected his conclusion that it's a weak hadith that's actually accepted. So he later then lived in Kufa after the Prophet ﷺ's martyrdom. So and basically in terms of what I found about him online, while I was researching, I didn't really find his date of birth, and I didn't really find much of what was happening, after the Prophet's death, all the way to really, 61 after Hijrah, which is basically Karbala. Really, this here is kind of a dark chasm for him. I didn't really find much. If you guys have information, I would like to know. But I didn't really find much about his life, other than he was in Kufa. He was a resident of Kufa. I didn't read anything about him with Imam Ali alayhi salam, or any of the other Imams, or any of the first 3 caliphs. But he was a resident of Kufa. So and he clearly lived a long time. As you can imagine, if he was a young man over here, he's all the way up to here. So 61. Maybe he's around at least 70, if not more, years old when this was happening. So he was in Kufa. And the reason that we talk about him even more is that he actually, when the issues with Imam Hussein alayhi salam were occurring, where Imam Hussein alayhi salam went from Mecca, went from Medina to Mecca, and then he left Mecca as he saw that people were conspiring against him, and he got the letters from Kufa. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam was going towards Kufa, right? Anas heard about this, right? Anas heard about the conflict that are occurring, and Anas decided to actually leave Kufa. Right? He actually decided to leave Kufa because he actually did not want to either fight with Imam Hussein alayhi salam or fight against Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And actually, he wasn't the only one. There was actually several people that did this, where they just, they didn't want to be involved. I'm not going to kill the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but I'm not going to, be involved with fighting because the cost of fighting, may Allah not put us in that position where we have to sacrifice so much and we fail in choosing the right thing to sacrifice. But that was kind of his choice, and that was what he did. But so he initially left, and he went to a place called which is, so this is Karbala here. Karbala is up here. This is the Euphrates River, and so this is Kufa. So Imam Hussein Islam comes over here, and then they blockade him, so he has to go this way. So where Anas went, he went to a place which was on the path of Imam Hussein Islam. It's called Qasr Bani Muqatil, or before they used to have little castles or little fortresses where people used to garrison. So one of them on the path was called Qasr Bani Muqatil, or Bani Muqatil, and he and some other people that had left Kufa to avoid the conflict saw Imam Hussein Islam actually heading towards there, and Imam Hussein Islam comes to them. Right, one of the other guys was Ubaidullah ibn Hurr al-Ju'fi. The other guy, that another example of people that left because they wanted to avoid the whole thing, they're avoidance, right? Was Ubaidullah ibn Hurr al-Ju'fi, right? So unfortunately, Ubaidullah ibn Hurr al-Ju'fi, when Imam Hussein Islam spoke to him, you may have heard the story. Imam Hussein Islam told him, "Hey, you should come with us." The guy was like, "Oh, I can't. But here, take my horse. I'll help you with my horse." Imam Hussein Islam was like, "I want you. I want you to come with me. If you're not going to come with me, keep your horse. I don't need your horse. I want you." So the guy unfortunately didn't come with him. But what Anas said was, "Wallah ma akhrajni min al-Kufa illa ma akhraja hadha min karahati qitalika aw qitali ma'ak." Right? What made me leave Kufa was what made this guy leave Kufa. I did not want to fight against you. I did not want to fight with you. Right? وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدْ قَذَفَ فِي قَلْبِي نُصْرَتِكَ. But Allah put in my heart the love of supporting you. وَشَجَّعَنِي عَلَى الْمَسِيرِ مَعَكَ, and has made me brave enough to come with you, O Imam Hussein alayhi salam. فَقَالَ لَهُ الْحُسَيْنُ أُخْرُجْ مَعَنَا رَاشِدًا مَحْفُوظًا. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam replied to him, "Come with us. You are guided and you will be saved." So it's actually a very interesting, it's a very interesting scenario, right? You have these two people, same decision paths, right? They had the same thing. And interestingly, you remember the hadith we narrated. He actually narrated this hadith where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, either he heard it from his dad or he heard it from the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself, where he told him, "This my son will be dying in Karbala. If you witness this, then you should support him." But each of those people had different kind of conclusions. Each of those people had different pathways, right? One person was like, "I don't want to fight. You have my horse," and the other guy was like, "All right, you know what? I'm coming with you." So other things with him. So when he eventually came with Hussein alayhi salam and got to Karbala, before the day of Ashura, when the water was cut off around day 7, day 8, he actually went. Anas bin Harith al-Kahili, the old guy, he went to Umar ibn Sa'd. He actually went after the water was cut off. He went to him, and he wanted to advise him. Right, Umar ibn Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, he wanted to advise him. He entered onto him into his tent, and he did not say any salam. He did not give him any salam. And so Umar ibn Sa'd told him, "Hey, why didn't you tell me my salam? I'm not a Muslim." And the guy says, "By Allah, I swear you are not a Muslim, because you're trying to kill the son of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam." So Umar ibn Sa'd turned his head down in shame, and he said, "By Allah, I know the murderer of Hussein alayhi salam is in the fire, but I cannot escape the order of the Emir Ibn Ziyad. I can't escape the orders." And it's just, again, it just makes us reflect upon ourselves as well. May Allah not put us in that position, but it's like, the pressure of family, the pressure of my job, I can't leave everything behind, I can't go to certain death, right? I'm not ready for certain death. Anyway, so eventually in the battle itself, he was sent out again to the enemies to advise them, admonish them, and even though Imam Hussein Islam told him that I know you'll be sent out, and I know they'll reject you, but I want it to be a proof upon them. I want it to be a hujjat upon them that I've sent people out to them to advise them, and they have rejected. So he went out and he advised them, and he actually even has a poem or irtijaz he used to recite, where he says, قد علمت كاهلنا وذودان والخندفيون وقيس علان. And these are basically all tribes. He said, the tribes of Kahil and Dawdan and Khandaf and Qais Alan all know بأن قومي آفة للأقران, that my tribe destroys all other tribes or all other rivals. يا قوم كونوا كأسود خفان. O companions, O people, he's talking to him, his supporters, or be like the roaring lions or like the strong lions. Al Ali Shi'at al-Rahman wa Ali Harbin Shi'at al-Shaytan. The Al of Ali, the family of Ali alayhi salam, are the followers of the merciful or the all compassionate God, and the followers of Bani Harb, which is Bani Abu Sufyan, and the rest of Bani Umayyah, are the Shia or the followers of Shaitan. So that was his irtijaz or his poem. And then one other thing that was noted about him in the battle, he was quite an old man, and it was reported that he even took a band to tie around his kind of hair and his eyebrows because they were so kind of bushy and thick. They had to actually get him out of his face because he was so old. And he, when he asked for permission to go fight, Imam Hussein alayhi salam let him go fight. He fought and killed 18 of the enemy, and eventually was martyred by the enemy. He is also mentioned in the ziyarah of Al-Nahiya al-Muqaddasa, the ziyarah that we have from Imam Sahib al-Asr al-Zaman, where Imam goes through a lot of, it's a ziyarah as well as a storytelling almost of all the events of Karbala as well as the meanings behind them. And he actually goes through several prominent people in the battle. And one of them, in that ziyarah, he actually calls him Anas ibn al-Harith al-Asadi, as opposed to Al-Kahili. So that is basically his life. Assalamu ala Hussein, wa ala Ali ibn Hussein, wa ala awlad Hussein, wa ala ashab al-Hussein alayhi salam. And may Allah grant us the opportunity to be with those ashab, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Any questions or comments? All right. Anyone have any suggestions for next week? I have several on the list, but if anyone has any other uncommon companions that you may have heard of, all right. Inshallah. I hope they stick. I hope they stick. But
Sorry to go.
Yes, sir.
Remember the one Imam Hussein sent the letter with to get the and like governor of Kufa kind of like arrested him, and then just like Hazrat Muslim bin Aqib, he threw him from the
Oh.
top. He was like okay, either tell me. Yeah, I think.
You think it's Qais ibn Musahar? Okay, great. You want to hear about him, inshallah?
No, I don't know, but like he's like he called him in the Durbar like Ibn Ziyad, and like he asked him like, oh, because he shredded the letter. He was actually transporting a letter, and he shredded the letter for Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So he was like, what was in that letter? And he won't tell him. So he was like, okay, either you tell me that, or you go curse on the member, not go curse the family of Prophet. So he was like, okay, I'm gonna go curse. So he let him on the pulpit, and then he started saying,
Munaqab.
yeah, he started cursing Ibn Ziyad.
Yeah.
And he told everyone over there that what's going on with Karbala and everything.
You think it's Qais ibn Musahar? You think that's who it is, or? All right, I'll look into it. I'm not sure if he was a companion.
I already know about the story, but like
No, it'll be nice to know who the companion is. So I'm not sure if it's a companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because I'm trying to focus on those guys first. But I'll look into him and I'll see if he is a companion of the Prophet. Inshallah, he'll be the next one. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I have not, but I'll go into him. All right, perfect. We got our next target, inshallah.
Just a small comment. If anybody watching live knows who is the Sahaba, please feel free to write down in the chat, or if you want to talk about a unrecognized Sahaba of Imam Hussein or anybody else, please write down in the chat. Inshallah, we'll tackle that subject next week or in the future.
All right. I'll look into his life, inshallah. Inshallah.
I haven't seen very
This is the purpose of this. No, but that's the thing. This is why we're doing this, because it's not just because I want to see if what both sources say about each of these companions, because it's actually interesting what you find from both parties, alhamdulillah, because it presents a very nice picture and sometimes a interesting narrative of history as well. But anyway, ahsantum. Inshallah, we'll finish with your session, inshallah, Dr. Jafar. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. No, 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 no. You have knowledge.
Jalebi, yes. Jalebi, yes.
Is this good or you maybe one?
Yeah, no, this is good. Ahsant. All right, inshallah. I know it's getting late, so we'll try to keep it short and focused, and not take too much of your guys' time, inshallah. So, you guys remember the book that we're covering, right? Theological Instructions, or Amuzashe Aqaid in Persian. It's by Sheikh Misbah Yazdi, who's written this book actually to kind of cover the basic aqidah that a Muslim should have, right? And he goes through basically all the founding principles of Islam, Tawheed, the concept of divine justice, right? What we call adala, nubuwa, prophethood, right? Imamat, right? And then qiyamat or ma'ad, what we would call the day of judgment. He goes through all of this. And one thing that you'll find about Islam is that it's very rational, right? We do not believe in things that are not based in rationality, that don't make sense, right? Your faith has to make sense. Faith is something that the word iman comes from this concept of aman, right? Having safety. So if you don't feel safe in your belief, like you don't feel your belief actually helps to ground you, like you feel confident and comfortable in what you believe, that's a problem. That's not true iman, right? Iman is actually based on this concept of having that sense of security and confidence and conviction in what you believe. And if what you believe doesn't make sense, if it's nonsense, you can't really have true iman, right? So think about that. That's a very interesting concept that I think we can learn a lot from. That word iman in Arabic for faith, it's linked to the word aman, which means safety, So to actually be grounded in your faith requires you to actually have a sense of safety and confidence and conviction in what you believe too. That this is something that's well grounded. This is something that I can build myself upon, If your foundation, right, of your faith is shaky and ungrounded, it doesn't give you any safety. It doesn't give you any aman, right? That's a problem, right? So from an Islamic perspective, that's why we see the word iman is very grounded in this concept of being secure and having that sense of safety, right? So anyways, this book is very good because it goes through all of this in a lot of detail, right? And it takes like a Muslim, someone who's trying to basically learn their aqidah, it takes you in 60 lessons. Each lesson building upon the previous, it takes you through how you should build your aqidah, or you build basically your religious conviction, your religious theology, how should it be built up, right? And so we've been going through specifically, you guys remember, anybody can give me a recap of kind of what we've been covering? Muhammad?
We went over contingency, which I can't get it wrong, but and then those two things, preparatory causes and then real causes,
Right.
Which I think you gave the example on the right side that everything has a cause and effect, in a sense that like the universe was created because of the Big Bang. And the real cause is like there's someone that's not affected by the unmoved mover who puts everything in effect. Like I keep wording it incorrectly.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, I think you're remembering a lot of the key concepts. That's good after 2.5, 3 weeks now that we haven't done this. Anybody else can build on what Brother Muhammad said from what you guys had recalled that we had been covering? Ali Sarosh?
If I recall correctly, I know you used the sort of an analogy of like a light switch, right? So
Yeah.
there's like three categories. Like one that is it's possible or not possible. Like that's the category that humans live in. Like it's entirely possible that I did not existed at all or anyone else. But there's also like impossible things, like a square circle. That
Right.
is just impossible. You can't conceive. There's no possible way to conceive that.
And so there's always, and then to sort of balance those two, or not even balance, but as a precursor to those two, there's like a switch that's like always on, that sort of generates all of these, because these two aforementioned causes I mentioned, they need to have some sort of necessity almost. And
Yeah.
that comes from like this always on switch, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes, ahsant. Okay, that's great. Yeah, I like that.
I also remember about the cause and effect that it has to be someone that puts the thing, like you give example of race, people in a race.
Yeah.
That if everybody's gonna be like, if I'm gonna run when that guy starts, I'm gonna run when that guy starts. If everybody thinks like that, the race is not even gonna start. It's gonna stay off. Like nothing's
Yes.
gonna happen.
So to rephrase a lot of this that everybody's saying, right? We're talking about one of the best arguments for the existence of God, right? Why must God exist, right? And to reframe and rephrase a lot of what you guys mentioned, we talked about the argument from contingency, which means that specifically, you know, there has to be basically an unmovable mover, right? Someone who was and always will be, who exists now and always will exist, who continues to make the universe operate. It's impossible for him to be non-existent, right? He's what we call the necessary existent. Because we said everything in our universe, right? Everything you can possibly conceive of falls into these three categories. Either it's what we call contingent, like Brother Sarosh was saying, so it could exist or it could not exist, right? For instance, you know, this Earth, it could have existed, it could have not existed. There are certain conditions, certain basically formulations or I guess configurations of our solar system that wouldn't have allowed for this Earth to exist, right? So you could conceive of this universe, or you could conceive of this planet existing or not existing. Everything in this universe is like that, though, right? Everything is what we call contingent. It requires certain factors to make it come into being, right? And if those factors do not exist, it won't come into being, right? So that's what we call contingent existence. So a lot of atheists, they say, well, everything is contingent. Everything is dependent upon other factors, right? But the problem is then you get this situation where it's as if everything, in order to flip into the on switch, flip into the realm of existence, it needs all these other factors to materialize, to make it exist, right? Then if everything in the universe is like that, nothing would ever come to be, right? Because it's as if everybody's standing on the start line for a race, and everyone says, hey, I'm not going to run until the next person next to me starts running. So if everything is dependent upon something else to materialize, to make it exist, right, then nothing will come to be. So that's the argument from contingency. It means that we cannot have all existence being contingent, all existence being dependent upon other factors to materialize, to make that said thing exist. We have to have something that does not require anything to make it exist. It started this whole process, right? It's like, for instance, you know, the person who shoots the gun to start a race, that person is not waiting for anybody to say, hey, I'm going to start running first, and then you shoot the gun. He shoots the gun. He takes the initiative, right? That's what Allah is. Allah is the one who takes the initiative. He's the one who is the necessary cause, the necessary existent, right? So we talked about how that's absolutely essential, because otherwise you end up having a continuous, basically, set of non-events, right? A continuous set of non-events that leads to nothing, right? You have to have something that starts this whole process. So we said that this is the argument from contingency, and it's the strongest argument for the existence of a creator, right?
And then,
Yeah, Brother Shaq has a question? Yeah.
Yeah, just like a comment. I'm kind of likening it to like, I don't even know if the terminology is correct, like parallel circuitry and like light bulbs. Like,
Yeah.
these light switches are not being, there's a main breaker box that is being turned on in the first place. So like, this light switch is not waiting for all of these ones.
Yes.
By a main breaker box, that is the existence of presence.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's a great another analogy that you can think of that also helps to encapsulate this idea, right? And I think it's really important to understand this, because if you ground your aqidah in this, it's unshakable, because there's nothing an atheist can say that would shake this foundation. It's not based on physics or where they can argue, oh, well, the laws of physics didn't exist before the Big Bang, so we can postulate whatever. This is something that's very rational, and it requires just pure logic, so this is something that really helps you ground your aqidah. And now some people will say, well, okay, the necessary existent, we prove the necessary existent, but then how do you get to the concept of an Abrahamic God who has all these attributes and all these qualities, right? So remember, we had started to do that, right? Remember, we started to go down that trajectory. How do you prove that, right? So we talked about, was it behind over here? I don't know if, oh no, I think it was erased. Okay, but that's okay. I'm gonna just flip this actually. So we talked about, do you guys remember positive and negative attributes? What do you guys remember about that? So if you have a necessary existent, right? Necessary existent, basically he's always in the on position, right? So the necessary existent, always in the on position. There's certain positive attributes he has, and we'll say negative ones. When we say positive and negative, when we say negative, we mean basically refuting any type of limitation or any deficiency from this first necessary cause, right? This necessary existent. And when we say positive attributes, we mean attributes that affirm that his superiority or his ontological perfection, right? Yeah.
Would a negative example be like how, as the brothers say, Allah is sitting in a throne?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So exactly. So we're going to get to that because I think that's a very important point that you brought up, Muhammad. But so necessary existent, there's certain traits that this necessary existent has, right? One is that all contingents are dependent on it, right? All contingent. You guys get what I mean by contingent, right? All possible existence, right, are dependent, right? So dependent on it, right? Remember the second attribute we said was what? That it is not dependent on anything, right? It is not dependent on anything, right? Okay. And the third attribute is it is the source. It is the source of all perfection, right? Of all perfection. Okay. So how does this get you positive and negative attributes? So we said all contingent existences are dependent on it, right? So meaning that it has everything that exists, it has its source and its origin back in the necessary existent, right? It has its dependency. It requires it basically for it to exist. It has to go back to the original source of existence, which is the necessary existence, because that's what's channeling existence to everything, right? So that's what we mean by one. Number two, it is not dependent on anything. That's the definition of a necessary existent. It doesn't have any type of dependency. It exists without limitations, right? And then three is it's the source of all perfection, right? Why is it the source of all perfection? Because anything which exists of goodness, of positive, basically ontological value, we'll say existential value in the creation, right? It has no other source, it has no other place where it could have come from except from the necessary existence, because that's what started this whole thing, right? So anything that exists in the sort of contingent things must have its source or its origin going back to basically ontological perfection, Allah, right? Or the necessary existence. So, okay, so we said negative attributes, right? So there's three things that are really important. Do you guys remember what they are? So time, space, and matter. We refute all of these things because we said the necessary existent is not dependent on anything. What does that necessitate? He's not dependent on time, right? Not dependent. Or we'll say this. Non-temporal, right? Non-temporal, non-dimensional, and non-physical, right? Why is that? Because time, space, and matter are contingencies. They're things that we require to exist, right? We require time, space, and matter to exist, but the necessary existent does not. So that's what goes back to Muhammad's point, right? That Allah doesn't have a body. He doesn't sit on a throne. He doesn't exist in a certain time, because if that were the case, then he's not necessary anymore. Now he becomes contingent upon time and space. He becomes contingent upon a location, a dimension. He needs to exist in a certain dimension. But that is far beyond what we said is required for something to be a necessary existence. To be necessary means that you don't need any type of thing to exist to cause you to exist. There's no contingency. So there's no time, space, or matter that has to be in order for you to come into existence, right? Does that make sense?
Wouldn't those three be canceled out either way? Because in a sense, those three depend on each other to exist.
Yes, those three. So that's the other thing that refutes the materialists, because they say, oh well, matter is. Why can't we not say matter or energy are the necessary existence, right? They're the things that have always been, don't require anything to make them be, right? They just are, right? But the problem is that energy, matter, time, space, all of these are interrelated concepts. They're all contingent upon each other. And there can be no intercontingencies, interdependencies, right? So if time, for instance, in order for time to exist, space and matter, by the laws of physics, have to exist, right? So as a result, time cannot be the necessary existence because it requires space and matter, right? Matter cannot be the necessary existence. It cannot be the start of this whole process because it requires space and time in order to exist, right? So that negates the entire basis of materialism, right?
Each one is kind of moving through one another.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So the other thing we negate is basically complexity, right? So we'll say non-complex, right? What do we mean by that? Remember we talked about this? Sarosh?
Is it like the idea where if it is complex, then we can sort of employ some sort of reductionist sort of idea to uncomplexify it? Sorry, I don't have the right word for it.
Yeah. So remember we said, well, if basically God were complex, he had multiple parts, then if you subtract one part, he ceases to be God, right? He becomes, basically, there's interdependency in God. You're saying that God needs his parts in order to be, right? So that is a contingency in itself. It's like, oh, well, in order for me to exist, I have to have my arms, I have to have my legs, I have to have my face, right? I have to have my brain, otherwise I won't be, right? So that's a contingency. Even though it's a hypothetical, but it's a contingency. Because if you take a part away from God, he ceases to be God. So that is refuted from the necessary existence. So what that means is that Allah is simple. There's no parts to Allah. You cannot divide Allah. He's indivisible, right? Because if it were possible to conceive of Allah as dividable, as something that you can separate parts from, right? Then he ceases to be a necessary existent. He now becomes contingent, right? He becomes contingent upon all the parts coming together in the right formulation, right? Does that make sense?
It's like taking out a cog from a machine.
Yeah, it's like, oh, well, let's say God was a very complex machine. It's like, okay, I'm going to take out this cog. Now you're no longer God, right? That refutes the whole notion of a necessary. Now you're basically, that's a contingent being, right? And so this idea of Bertrand Russell is a very famous philosopher, atheist, who wrote this book, Why I'm Not a Christian, and this was his argument. He said, oh, well, if the universe is so complicated, then God must be more complicated. So if you think the universe needs a cause, then God needs a cause, right? But that's a completely fallacious argument because, like we said, God is not complex. God is simple. He doesn't have parts, right? And some people, they say, okay, well, how does simplicity beget complexity then? How does simplicity beget complexity? Simplicity should not be able to beget any type of complexity. Remember, and we talked about fractals. You guys remember fractals? We said you get a simple mathematical formula, you can create such complexity with just one small little formula, right? It's repeated, repeated, repeated. And it creates massively complex structures, right? So this idea that simplicity cannot beget complexity is completely wrong, and there's no logical foundation for that, right? But okay, so positive attributes, we said that he's the source of all perfections, right? He is source of all perfection. We'll say, in other words, he's ontologically perfect, right? Ontologically perfect. Okay, what does that mean? Ontologically perfect. It means in the sense that, okay, all of us, we have like borrowed existence, right? Because our existence, he's truly the only existent thing, truly in the real sense of existence, because he doesn't have any type of contingencies. He doesn't have any type of requirements to be, right? Requirements to materialize. He doesn't have requirements to materialize. He just is, right? Whereas for us, we have, oh, the right conditions have to exist, the right, the right two parents have to come together, and the genetic, information has to be exchanged in an exact certain way for us to actually come to exist in the way that we do, right? So that's a contingency, right? So, but basically what ontological perfection means is whatever goodness, whatever good quality you can see in the creation, right? It must, because it emanates from the necessary existent. It must exist in its perfect form in the necessary existent. Otherwise, it cannot be channeled down to contingent existences. So any type of goodness that we have, think about it like a generator, right? Basically all the electricity it spouts out to other chandeliers or whatever, right? It is the source of all that energy, right? It has to be the source of all that energy. And so all that goodness that you see in the chandeliers, all that light that you see in the chandeliers, it's coming from a source that is basically the owner of all that, right? Does that make sense? Okay.
Bounce off Brother Shaq's example about a circuit and a switch. In physics, they talk about voltage, like a battery holding voltage, and then like it equally disperses it in light. So like you can say the voltage in the battery being like the God, for example.
Yeah.
And then how it's like equally spread. It's like a small amount of like what it was, but it's like equally spread in the lights. That could be like the goodness in people.
Yeah, you can think about it in that way. Yeah, exactly.
God is like the good characteristics, but like made all perfect.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, so this is really important to understand, right? And there's two contentions that we discussed. Remember, so I'll give you the contentions. Let's see if you guys can answer them. So the first argument, or the first thing that people say is, well, okay, well, if you said basically all things, all existent things, they have their origin in God, right? Then what about, for instance, evil? What about injustice? If evil and injustice are existing, these are things that we see around us, then the source must be God. God is the source of it. He is the origin, so he must be the infinitely unjust, the infinitely like evil, the infinitely bad, right? What would your answer be to that? How would you guys answer that?
Or isn't like unjust and all that made from like just like the main root is like something good turned evil. Like it's not like itself. Like how we're saying that all the positive characteristics they're like from God.
Yeah.
Then people manipulate them into the unjust form. Like that the word or not the word, the idea of unjust. It's not original. It's from like the root or the base of just.
Right.
So something like
Yeah. Those are some good thoughts. What about Brother Surosh? Anything you would like
Actually,
to
I
add?
wanted you to repeat the question. Sorry.
So the question is that if we said that God is the source of pretty much all, we said all perfection, right? But somebody can argue that, okay, well, if God is the source of everything, right? Everything that God is basically channeling existence into everything, then whatever basically traits exist in things should also exist in God. There's some people who are extremely unjust, extremely vile, extremely malignant, so that must exist in the basically, umpteenth form, the absolute form in God too. He must be absolutely unjust, absolutely cruel, absolutely malignant, absolutely lazy, absolutely stupid, because people are like that too. The creations are like that too. So what would your answer be to that?
I kind of view it as like, well, one thing, like, this is just kind of like rambling, but like the shadow can't exist without light in the first place. Again, it's metaphorical, so it has no root in actual like ontology, but something to be gleaned from that maybe. And then the fact that I lost my train of thought, but there's something to be said about can if people are like people are imperfect, or people I guess project their imperfections that we all are onto the magnificence as God. So like that projection, of course, like it's like self-serving bias in that way. Maybe like, okay, if I'm doing good, then obviously God's good. But when I'm doing bad, I'm going to blame it on God equally as well. So to kind of justify their own mistake.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. I like your thoughts. Yeah. Abdullah?
I think if you go into the root of the traits,
Yeah.
what's the root of stupidity? What's the root of laziness? What's the root of injustice, right? The root of it is, as you were mentioning, is the positive trait. So the root of injustice is justice, right? The root of evil is actually good, right? And if you even go deeper into that, right? These lazy and stupid and unjust, these are all definitions of lack of a trait.
Yeah.
They're actually a lack of a trait. So they're actually nothingness. So you're actually defining nothingness. So they actually don't even exist.
Like a deficiency.
It's a deficiency. Yeah. So
They're a lack of perseverance, a lack of intelligence.
exactly.
It's
So
like a triangle and square cannot exist together, right? What you said.
yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So like injustice and justice cannot be together in God. Like
Exactly.
just
Yes.
Question.
That's
Maybe
perfect.
just
Yeah.
like a different word. So instead of saying like unjust, you can like sort of
Oppression. You call it oppression.
So then like the good version of that is like non-oppression.
It would be justice, right? Oppression and justice, right?
So in other words,
It's like how you frame it, no?
exactly. So intelligence and unintelligence, but then you can say stupid, right? You use the word stupid as unintelligent, but in reality, stupid is actually unintelligent. Stupidity is the lack of intelligence or the lack of intellect, right? So it's the deficiency of intellect, right?
In his maybe he calls it a dream novel or dream reality something. C.S. Lewis is titled The Great Divorce, and he says, his premise is that heaven is basically like, and then Brother Abdullah mentioned it like a couple weeks back. Oh, like you said that this world's like an allegory of like the true light world. So
Some may say that.
I like that idea.
But yes, I personally just have this belief. Yes.
I would agree with it, and then Lewis kind of paints that picture of like heaven is the ultimate reality of the true light world, and then he paints hell as not even the lack of or absence of the true reality or existence, ultimate existence or contingent perhaps, but it's just like a little crack under heaven, kind of just, and like the size of an atom, whereas heaven is everything above.
And so it actually is going to a concept of, again, so stupidity versus intelligence, right? So stupidity is still intelligence, right? But it's like one versus like 100,000 million infinity of intelligence, right? So even if someone is stupid, right, there is still some intelligence in there. Even if someone's unjust, right?
From their frame of mind, they might be.
There may be some kind of justice, but it's not the perfect justice. It's not It's not, you know, it's a lack of justice.
So I think the fallacy of this argument, and if you're going to summarize it, it's in casting deficiencies as perfections. So it's taking ignorance, it's taking laziness, it's taking, for instance, you know, basically injustice, oppression. It's taking these vices, these deficiencies, and casting them as perfections, right? When they're actually deficiencies, they're actually ontological deficiencies. They're existential lack of positive traits. That's what all of these things are. Like Brother Abdullah was saying, you know.
Infinite nothing. It doesn't
Yeah.
make sense. Infinite nothing is not a
Yeah.
physical term.
Yeah, exactly. It's nothing. It's not infinite nothing. You would say infinite goodness. You wouldn't say infinite lack of goodness, right? Infinite lack of goodness. It doesn't really make sense. Infinite lack of goodness means it's nothing. That's what it is, you know. So that's one thing. That's one huge argument that some people will make, and it's really important to understand how to dismantle this argument, right? Then the second thing that they'll say is that, okay, well, human beings, they have certain traits. For instance, they think, right? Is God a thinker, right? They'll say human beings, we think, we are rational animals. We're rational beings, right? We think, therefore we are. They'll say, okay, so we're thinkers. So God must be a thinker too, because thinking is what gives us our human perfection, right? What would your answer be to that? Do you think God is a thinker? Do you think that that type of thinking is correct? That type of phraseology or conception is the right way of looking at things?
If we're saying God is a thinker, then we're saying he needs to attain knowledge or to be able to think, because that's how it's like you can't think about nothing without
Right.
knowing anything.
Yeah.
You have to know something to like think about it. So you're saying God has to attain knowledge, and if he has to attain knowledge, there that means he has a limited capacity of to like earn knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. You're basically limiting God, right?
Yeah.
Or some people just say, look, what makes human beings great is that we're dreamers. So God must be a dreamer too, right? They'll say human beings are dreamers. God is also a dreamer, because they say that's what makes us great. So God must also be great in that same way. Do you think that how would you answer that?
I mean, the dreamer meaning that God has to sleep.
And what's the difference between you and God? If you're dreaming too, and God is dreaming too.
I think
Yeah.
a lot of that kind of, at least in like Western thought, stems from like Christian theology, like quote unquote, man is made in the image of God. And again, going back to like that projection, that false projection of equating something below to something at the peak of peaks.
Right. Exactly. So yeah, no, please expand some more. Yeah.
But the dreaming, I think it, I don't know, it depends what you define dreaming as. And then also like dreaming also gets equated to like this material kind of goal of achieving excellence. But if God is already peak excellence, is already perfect in nature, then there is no dreaming. He simply is.
Right. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head with your comments. I think the way that you have to understand how to dismantle this argument is that you have to strip, basically, there's what we call mortalizations, or basically almost like an anthropomorphization of certain traits of perfection, right? So for instance, a human being within a human framework, right? Being a thinker is good, because a human being is limited. A human being is mortal. They don't have capacity to grasp the whole universe, have all that information all in front of them, right? So a human being, the perfection of a human being is to be a dreamer, to be a thinker, to be a lover, right? To be those things, right? Whereas for God, right, you have to strip all those human elements out of the equation, right? Those are all human limitations, right? God is not a thinker. God is a knower. He knows, right? He doesn't have to think.
You assume processing. You assume that there has to be some processing going on of the analogy of
Yeah. Or dreamer. God doesn't have to be a dreamer. Whatever he wants just is, Like it's kun fayakun, right? He says it and it is. He thinks it and it is. Like he doesn't have to, or think it. I myself said the word think it, but in the sense that when God wills something, it just is. He doesn't have to dream, right? This is a human concept. This is a human limitation that we have because we cannot actualize the things we want, so we dream, right? But God doesn't need to dream because whatever He wills is, right, automatically. So that's the way to understand. So these are two arguments that people will bring forth, right? So ontological perfection. This is the last thing I'll say because yes. So ontological perfection. There's three traits that I think I want you guys to remember. And I think that a lot of this is recap, but it's a lot of stuff. It's very deep. So that's why I keep doing it again and again, because I want to make sure you guys really process it and understand it, because this is like really important stuff that will help you understand the next lessons that we go through, right? So the three traits are omnipotence. What does omnipotence mean? You guys know, right?
Oh no.
Yeah. Exactly. All powerful. Omniscience,
Oh no.
right? And ever livingness. So these are three basically perfections that exist in the creation that have their ultimate form in God, right? Human beings have power, right? We have the ability to will something, the ability to have volition, right? To have the ability to make a decision, right? So in God, that's in the absolute form, right? So He can do whatever He wills, right? Whatever He wills is, right? So that's omnipotence. That's absolute power. Human beings have limited forms of power, but in God, it's in basically, since He's the source of all ontological perfection, He is whatever He wills, whatever He decides comes to be, right? Because He's the necessary existent. There's no contingency whatsoever that surrounds His will, right?
You see little power, I would say super duper uber little power, because every single decision that you make is actually based on a bunch of contingencies from the chemical reactions in your brain to like the neurons kind of firing. Then you're truly not in control. You're truly, if you think about it, you're truly not in control of. One can even argue sometimes your thoughts, but
yeah, I mean, but just the fact that power exists, basically humans are making decisions, right? There's a being, humans make decisions, but we have limitations on our decisions. We can't do certain things. We can't stand up while taking both legs off the ground, for instance. We can't do that. We can't decide what race we're going to be. We just are. I mean, we are the race that Allah has chosen for us, right? So, those things are beyond our power, right? But there's a source, the source of all existence, right? Whatever perfection you have has to be in God in the infinitesimal form. So that's omnipotence. That he's got all the power, right? Omniscience, any type of knowledge you have, that's a type of perfection. That's a type of ontological perfection. A type of ontological, we'll say, goodness or virtue, right? To have knowledge. So in God, He must have all knowledge. He must be omniscient, right? He's all knowledgeable, right? One of the attributes of a human being is living, right? So some people just say, oh, well, we breathe, so God breathes, right? Again, this is imposing the human limitation upon God, right? That mortalizing this trait of ever-livingness, right? And saying, oh, human beings breathe, so God must also breathe. That's completely incorrect, right? Or they'll say human beings grow, so God must grow, right? That's also an illegitimate concept, because you're taking the mortality of living, that mortality that basically how it manifests, how livingness manifests in a human being, and you're superimposing it upon God. God doesn't need to grow. God is, right? But livingness in the sense, ever-livingness in the sense of, the best way to understand it is the opposite of dead or inanimate, right? Livingness in the sense of basically being the source of life, being cognizant, being conscious, right? So human beings have consciousness, right? We have awareness, right? That awareness is a type of ontological perfection. It's a type of ontological. When you see something dead versus living, something with human beings automatically, they say the thing which is living has more value, right? So that value has to be infinitesimally, existing in God, right? It has to be ontologically perfect at God's level. So that attribute of consciousness, of being aware, being basically cognizant, right? That has to be in God in the ultimate form, because all of us we all have that consciousness about us. So in God, that must exist in the ultimate form, right? So that's in essence kind of what I wanted to cover today. I hope that makes sense. Do you guys have questions about this?
Just want to kind of like paint a metaphor.
Yeah.
I kind of like metaphors are like my way of kind of making sense of the world. But I just got done reading Siddhartha today. Just to kind of expand, and by the end of it, kind of, Siddhartha, who eventually becomes, as Buddhists believe, the Buddha, kind of says that all life is a river. Kind of, it's like you look at this kind of picture this as a river. It's kind of blind. It's like there's no start, there's no stop, and it is the source of multiple voices or multiple creations. Something to think about. But yeah.
MashaAllah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful way to think about it too. Like I think I used this analogy once. Somebody had asked this question about like how can God be infinite if we exist, because we are like if God is infinite and we're not subsumed in that infiniteness, then God isn't really infinite, right? It was kind of this. I think it just was it. Jabril, was it your question? Yeah, yeah.
It wasn't Andrew. It was a mutual friend of Andrew.
Oh, I see.
That was his question.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It was an interesting question. I think we gave this analogy of it's this in this. It kind of goes back to what you said about the river. It's kind of like, and some Sufis they use this analogy of like waves in the sea. It's like every like God is the sea. God is the ocean. But like every wave is different than every wave of the ocean is different from the next one. The waves in the instant moments that they come up and they flash for a moment and then they're gone. They flash for a moment and they're gone. But each wave is different from the next. Like in terms of its configuration, how the water molecules are dispersed, right? Every wave is slightly different from the next one. And in themselves, they don't actually exist. They don't really have true existence. All their existence is coming from the source, the sea, the ocean, right?
Ever moving, ever living.
Yeah, ever moving, ever living. And so the way to think about it is that this is this concept of what they call wahdat al-wujud, where like basically the only thing that truly exists is God. And we are just like basically just flickers in time, of the way that Allah's basically manifesting power comes together, and so that's how we manifest for brief moments in time, but we truly do not exist. We're just almost like a sort of a manifestation of God's attributes, coming into a physical form. That doesn't mean we are God, but it means that we don't truly exist without God. That's what it means, So yeah, I hope that was beneficial. I think it's always nice to review this, because thinking about Allah is like truly like this is like the true type of ibadah. This is the true type of worship of Allah. Like increasing your like ma'rifah, your understanding of God, is really what is like I think one of the most sublime forms of worship of God. Because that really is what takes you closer to Him and helps you connect more with Allah. Like even when you do basic like ritual worship, like salat, like these types of things, like if you have this type of cognizance about God, you just connect so much more with your prayers, with your righteous deeds,
I think everyday decision making actually ends up being connected to the cognizance.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I also remember it was when we had the guest speaker of the Sayyid, he mentioned that to truly understand or like to truly praise God, you have to understand like everything that you're doing. So like when you're reading, like what are you saying? Like what does it mean? And how is this helping you connect to God? How are
Yeah.
how are you praying? How are you praying to God, basically? And also, I guess like the same could be applied to like the Quran. Like if you just know Arabic, it's not really gonna help you, if you don't know the meaning of like what it's saying.
Yeah.
So it's truly about like understanding understanding what you're doing. It's better to like.
And
practice
I'll tell you this. This is something that I personally also have noted is that you can understand what you're saying, but you can still not truly connect with it. You know, like for instance, look at people like Muawiyah, right, or Yazid, right? These individuals. I know some people they revere Muawiyah, you know, but that's besides the point. You know, it's very clear he was a munafiq, right?
They were
And
very smart people.
they were, but I mean, Yazid actually he has poems and poems. Like he's actually recognized as one of the best Arab poets of his time. You know, Yazid was a very very illustrious poet. I mean, he had access to the Quran, right? He had access, like just because you know Arabic, just because you have such a deep understanding. Look at the Khawarij. They fought Imam Ali, right? Right? And they were, yeah, they were Hufad. They had memorized the whole Quran. And but the thing is, like, it's like even if you understand the Arabic, that doesn't necessarily guarantee that you are truly going to connect with that message spiritually. You know, you can just be reading it from a very surface level without actually delving and meditating upon it and really reflecting upon it. And this is what Imam Ali told like the Khawarij. He said, "Kalimatu haqq yuradu biha batil." Like this, like what they're saying, they would say to Imam Ali that, look, you're trying to be our governor, you're trying to be our ruler. Well, la hukma illa lillah. There's no governance to anyone except Allah. We're only going to accept Allah's governance, Allah's rule. That's it. You don't have the right to be a representative or a khalifa or anything like that. Only God can be the one who's governing. And it sounds like, oh wow, that sounds so good. La hukma illa lillah, or inil hukmu. Yeah, the verse is inil hukmu illa lillah. This is a verse of the Quran that the basically governance is only for Allah, right? So it sounds so nice, and you're quoting Quran, you sound so flowery and so good, right? But it's like, well, what does that actually mean? That Allah is governing, that the governance is only to Allah, that the true rulership is only for God. Well, God doesn't exist in a human form that he can literally start giving you rules, and he needs to have a representative, right? That representative has to be basically
We need a representative, really.
yeah, but no, but basically God sends emissaries, he sends messengers to us to guide us, right? He sends imams to guide us. Like these individuals, like if you truly are understanding this verse correctly, you will not fall for this type of logic. But the thing is, because they didn't really truly reflect on the Quran, it was just a matter of, oh, like lip service. Okay, this is what the Quran says, but they don't actually reflect on what does that mean. It leads to deviance, right? So you have to actually, it's not just about you can understand Arabic to such a deep level, really be like an expert in Arabic poetry and everything, and understand all the subtleties of what the Quran is saying. But if you don't actually like think, like, how does this verse apply in the real world? Like, how do I actually use this verse to become a better person? How can I use the Quran to enhance my spirituality? Like, I mean, how does it really affect you, right? There's a I think a hadith that mentions, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that the Holy Prophet says that there will come upon my ummah a time when the Quran will not pass beyond their lips. They're going to just be reciting Quran, but it doesn't actually sink into their hearts. It doesn't sink into their minds. Like, you're not actually using it to grow, to evolve, to become a better person. You're just saying it. You're just paying lip service, And that's why I was telling you guys about these maqamat, right? Because it's like, okay, you might be able to recite one day very beautifully with all these tunes, but like, how does that actually enhance your emotional, your spiritual connection with the book? If it doesn't, then it's not really useful. Like, it's supposed to enhance that, right? You're supposed to connect more with the Quran. If you're not, then what's the point, right? So, inshallah. All right, guys. Thanks for coming out. You guys all look so tired.
I have two questions for next week. You should contemplate.
Yeah.
We talked about some of the qualities. So some of the qualities that actually confound me sometimes is al-ghadab as well as al-adha. I think the Quran talks about that, where ghadab of Allah, the anger of Allah, which is when we argue a human like feeling, but we'll talk about that next week, inshallah. We'll delve into that. And adha, Ad Allah, Ad Rasul, right? Hurt. Allah is being hurt. Rasul is being hurt. Fatima is being hurt, right? So inshallah, let's contemplate on that. Inshallah, we'll talk about it next week.
Inshallah. Yeah, beautiful question. Inshallah. Ahsantum. Ahsantum.